The SEC sticking with 8 games when we all thought it was going to be 9. And then throughout the week at SEC spring meetings, we hear that there's this uncertainty. And I know Greg Sankey's probably just ready to absolutely spit nails because he wanted this thing done by the end of the week, I'm told. And he was okay with 8 or 9. The permanent opponent, let's just settle on the thing. That's what he wanted. He didn't get that. So this is an interim schedule, essentially. So what the H? Brought to you by AndyMasonRealEstate.com. Best service, best prices in the biz. AndyMasonRealEstate.com. Just go to that website. If you have any sort of real estate needs, Andy will take care of you. Over 40 years of experience in his office. He'll save you thousands or tens of thousands. I'm a big SEC guy, Caleb. I'm a guy that says the SEC does all the right things. It's essentially the NCAA nowadays because the NCAA is impotent. But the SEC couldn't get it done. And it sounded a little bit like a fiasco as well, as Texas and Oklahoma are in these meetings because they're joining the SEC, and yet they're not allowed to vote on some of these things. Caleb Calhoun, what do you make of the SEC doing an interim schedule stuck at 8 games for 2024?
I think nobody comes out of this looking worse than Greg Sankey. I have to be honest. And I said earlier in the week, Greg Sankey stuck his neck out. He said, I want 9 games. He was very clear. He wants 9 SEC games. This sends off the message that Greg Sankey is not running a tight ship with the league right now. And I never blamed him for adding Texas and Oklahoma. I always thought there was somewhat of a plan in place, and it doesn't look like there was. And this is awful for the league. Dave, think about this. There are 16 teams in the league. There's going to be no divisions, and you're going to play 8 conference games. Do you realize how much competitive imbalance that's going to create in terms of schedule strength? They're going to take the top 2 teams with the best record to play for the SEC title. I mean, there are going to be 2 teams that play for the title because their schedule was so much easier than the other teams. That's how this is going to play out, honestly. And thinking about it that way, I don't know how they can justify going this way. I didn't think 9 games was enough. And this is why I thought they had to keep divisions to a certain degree. But I don't know how theoretically you can have a true champion when you take the 2 teams with the best record to play each other and those 2 teams avoided playing half the conference. And so this is just going to look really bad.
So this is division less. It's just going to be 1 to 16 is essentially
1 to 16.
Yeah,
1 to 16. And you're going to play 8 games. How are you going to be able to determine the records aren't going to be the same because some team is going to play Alabama, Georgia, and LSU and Florida. And then another team is going to play none of those, but get to play Vanderbilt and Kentucky and Ole Miss or Mississippi State or whatever. And how in the world can you sit there and say that the 2 teams with the best record are going to be the 2 best teams in the league with that?
No, and let's talk a little business for a second. As Smoky Mountain Red pointed out, I wanted 9, but I get the argument against it with no extra money from ESPN and extra loss hurting the SEC playoff chance. But with expanding the playoffs, that shouldn't be that big of a factor. That's the thing. With the expanded playoffs, I think both would work theoretically to get the most SEC teams in. 9 makes a lot more sense because I'd rather see, just from a fan's perspective, I'd rather see more SEC games. But you're right, the fairness of it is all out goofy as well. And I think I want to go back to something you said about Sankey, because I think the SEC has been very fortunate. They've had great leadership. Would you agree with that? All the way back to Roy Kramer?
I would give it with Roy Kramer. Yeah, I think since Roy Kramer, I think Mike Sly was a good leader, but I think a great leader. I just think Roy Kramer made the SEC something easy to lead because it was such a good product.
Yes, but he got the BCS started. He got a unified ranking system. That was him. Mike Sly cleaned up the league. That was him. Greg Sankey's ultimate remembrance, his resume will be built on expanding the conference. And I thought that Texas and Oklahoma was an incredible get by Greg Sankey, but now it kind of feels like maybe Texas and Oklahoma just called them to SEC media days ago and said, we want to join. And there was zero plan, and they just took them, and it leaked via, I believe, the San Antonio Free Press. And it leaked during SEC media days. And you just get the feeling that this isn't the same type of leadership that we're used to. And it makes me wonder a little bit, is it getting too big to control? Controlling 12, 14 teams, I mean, that's doable over the years. You can easily get a unified front. They didn't have a unified front here. And it makes me wonder about the whole idea of even adding Texas and Oklahoma. Was that something the SEC wanted to do, or they felt like they had to do because the Big Ten would have gobbled them up?
The Big Ten could not have added Oklahoma because of the AAU thing. They could have added Texas. And so I think.
But see, I'm not sure about the AAU thing. I mean, couldn't they just, if they really wanted to, I mean, couldn't they just find a way around that?
Notre Dame just joined AAU. But they had an open invitation to Notre Dame for the last 10 years, and they didn't care that they weren't AAU. So, yes, I agree. They could have found a way around it. I would say that Greg Sankey, I've been criticizing this for a while. He did the ESPN deal. You're right. Here's what happened. This is very clear what happened. He did the ESPN deal. Then Texas and Oklahoma came calling. And now he's going back to try to negotiate with ESPN. And for those who wonder about the payouts, the reason that many schools are sticking with 8 games, it's not just about the number of schools in the college football playoff, where they haven't even addressed how the conferences are going to get their payouts yet when they get into the playoff. That's something that has to be figured out. It's the payout.
Won't that go just back into bowl money? Like, it'll be dispersed evenly, or do you get more if you make the playoff?
There's a specific payout.
Okay.
Based on the revenue that the college football playoff generates as a whole, it's divvied up to the conferences based on who they put in. So I think right now it's like if the SEC puts 2 teams in, they get half the revenue from the college football playoff that gets to be paid out to the schools. And I don't know how they're going to do it with 12, because quite honestly, 12, you're going to have a haves and have-nots, because the Big Ten is going to have 3 teams in and the SEC is going to have 4 teams in, and then everybody else is going to have 1. So that's going to create an even larger imbalance. I think. But you're right, 12 teams, it doesn't really matter. Where it's a big deal, though, is the reason they're sticking with 8 games, a lot of them, is what you just brought up, the bowl game payouts. Those still exist.
Yes.
And the SEC wants to maximize those payouts, I believe, because they can't get ESPN to renegotiate this deal. ESPN got the sweetest deal ever with the SEC.
I agree they got a sweet deal. I still think the fringe benefits of being on ESPN is worth it, but we've had that discussion before. It looks like, according to Chris Lowe, who does a great job of reporting for ESPN and has for decades, Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, those are stated as obvious rivalries by Alex Scarborough, and I'm not trying to throw him under the bus, but he also mentioned later in the article that Alabama, Tennessee, Auburn, Georgia, and Texas A&M would be priorities as well. Those are right up there with, they're certainly up there with Georgia, Florida, and they have more impact on the league and the competitiveness than Mississippi State, Ole Miss. Alabama, Auburn, I'll give you that. That's the Iron Bowl. But you have to preserve these, and in particular, Alabama, Tennessee is the one that most of our listeners and viewers care about. And if that goes away, then I would be another step in disappointed. I mean, that's when you're getting into Roger Goodell territory, Caleb, and that's not what Greg Sankey wants to do.
No, not at all. Here's what's happening. I just wrote this, funny enough. I just wrote a column on this. It cheats the fans who care about rivalries. This is going to cheat the fans more than any other change has ever cheated fans in the SEC. When the SEC split to 2 divisions in 1992, yes, Tennessee lost its rivalries with Auburn and Ole Miss, but it still kept the core rivalries, and rivalries come and go. But there's some that are untouchable. This is going to create some untouchable rivalries being touched. But at the same time, nobody's going to benefit more than Tennessee, Dave, because guess who Tennessee's one permanent opponent's going to be?
Well, it better be Alabama.
No, because Alabama's one permanent opponent has to be Auburn.
Okay, well, you've got to figure out a way to save that next year.
Yeah.
Before 2025. Okay, so who will their permanent opponent be? Vanderbilt?
Vanderbilt. Could you
Okay,
imagine?
so let me ask the message board then and weigh in. Are you okay with dropping Alabama? Again, streaky series. I know that, but Alabama's always going to be better than Vanderbilt, even on their worst day. Are you okay with losing that rivalry so that your one permanent opponent is Vanderbilt? I'm not. I do not think that's okay. I think the rivalry means something. Same thing for the Iron Bowl, Texas A&M as well, Auburn, Georgia, Mississippi State, Ole Miss with the Egg Bowl. That's huge. I don't think Georgia, Florida is a huge rivalry. I will tell you where that comes from. That comes from the Big Daddy Georgia boosters. That's the reason that game is played in Jacksonville, because they live in South Georgia. So, yes, it's a rivalry, no question. But I'm curious, you're a little bit younger than me, Caleb. Do you see that of the same ilk as Alabama, Auburn, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Auburn, Georgia, or Tennessee, Alabama? Where would you put Georgia, Florida?
Yeah, I don't put it on that list. No, my top rivalries are Alabama, Auburn, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Alabama. I think those are the three most important untouchable games in the SEC. By the way, with Texas and Oklahoma joining, Texas Oklahoma is an untouchable one too now. By the way, you can't touch Texas Oklahoma. And
yeah, that's not even mentioned in this column.
Yeah.
In this report. Yeah, I mean, I don't. Texas has to have two, right? Texas A&M and Oklahoma. If not, what are we doing?
Exactly. And so this is where this whole and
it's like sitting down with your family to play Monopoly and you don't talk to any of your family members.
This is why the league should have gone and stuck with divisions. The reason they don't like divisions is you don't like the whole, there could be a 4-loss team win one division and play for the title against a 1-loss team. But there's still the same competitive imbalance when you do no division. But at least with divisions, you can protect every rivalry. The only rivalry that's been, I think I told you this the other day, if you went to divisions, move Alabama and Auburn into the East, move Missouri into the West, you have 8-8, a perfect split. Missouri should be in the West anyway, given where they are geographically. And then you have a perfect split. The only rivalry that's been played more than 90 games that you would lose if you did that? Mississippi State, Alabama. Does anybody care about Mississippi State, Alabama?
That is not a rivalry at all. Travis, and I totally agree with this. Tennessee should play Bama, Georgia, and Florida every single year till the end of time. Absolutely. It's not going to happen, but you're right. Somebody's going to drop off of there, I believe. And I think if they ever get to the 9-game schedule, it will be Kentucky, Vanderbilt, Alabama, if they ever get there. But I agree with you. And it's funny you talk to players, too. And we talked to Cooper Mays about this on our YouTube channel. And I've talked to Fred White about it. And we might even get his take today as he'll join us here in just a bit. You know what all of those guys said? None of them said, oh, that schedule is too tough. They said, bring it on. I can't imagine a Tennessee schedule without an Alabama and a Georgia. I can't imagine a Tennessee schedule without a Florida. Bring it on. And the other thing that is so frustrating to me, and I'm going to take this out on the athletic directors because they're the ones voting for it more than Sankey. Because I'm going to give Sankey a little bit of a pass because I think his track record's been really, really good. But when you look at these teams and the fact that they do not put preserving rivalries over success and possibly making the college football playoff, if that's your mindset, you're a loser. I'm sorry. If you don't think your team can stay with their current rivals, and in Tennessee, let's say it's worst case scenario as far as toughest Bama, Georgia, Florida, and you can't make a top 12, then you don't deserve to be in the championship conversation anyway. And if those athletic directors were thinking that, then you're in the wrong conference. It's going to be a rough couple of decades for you.
Yes, and I want to call out Alabama because Nick Saban has been screaming for 9 games for years, and the time came yesterday, and they voted for 8. Apparently,
who all voted for 8 for the record? Let's get that out there.
Tennessee was one of them. As far as I'm aware, the only ones that wanted 9 were. Let me pull this up. Georgia, Florida, Georgia, Florida, I believe Texas A&M. I'm looking at it now. Let's see. Florida, Georgia, LSU, Missouri, and Texas A&M were the only ones who voted for 9 games. By the way, credit to Florida. They voted for 9 SEC games, and they still have to play Florida State every year, too. So, I mean, I got to give them a major shout out for that, honestly.
On the message board, I hated the 15-year drought to Bama, but that 1 win last year was bleeping worth it. And you're right; those are what rivalries are. And I'm incredibly disappointed and surprised, disappointed that the SEC didn't get this done. But Caleb Giroux, who's did a great job on Cooper Maze's thoughts on the ever-changing face of college football. That's on offthehooksports.com. We were talking yesterday, and I just told him, I said, I'm getting to the point where I can't tell where this thing is, but it sounds like it's going south. And the news actually broke while we were having a conversation. This is the type of thing that the SEC used to just take care of, and they didn't take care of it, which is just still very, very, very stunning to me.
Now, the one thing I will say there, maybe there's a little bit of 3D chess going on here. Maybe this is to leverage ESPN to pay a little bit more for the deal, because nobody wants 9 games more than ESPN. Because I don't think ESPN paid for Vanderbilt Austin P in September, honestly. So
now, if this is just a TV negotiation deal behind the scenes, I'm going to be really upset.